I'm glad you're here at Beyond 60 Stories, where every life has a story to tell. When people hear that two people have been married for 50 years, they often assume the story is one of certainty, stability, and quiet success. They imagine a straight line drawn carefully from youth to old age, with love simply deepening on its own. But long marriages are not sustained by time alone. They're shaped by moments when things almost went wrong. There is a sentence often attributed to philosophers of old that says love is not tested when it is easy, but when it is ordinary. That sentence stayed with me because what nearly cost us everything was not betrayal or cruelty or a single dramatic mistake. It was a series of misunderstandings we believe were harmless at the time. In today's video, we're revealing 4 mistakes we didn't recognize until much later. Mistakes that quietly weakened connection and almost dismantled what decades had built. This is not a warning and not a lesson. It is simply a reflection offered from the far side of a long shared life. Before we begin, tap the like button and subscribe to Beyond 60 Stories. These conversations are meant to be shared slowly between generations, without urgency or instruction. Let me begin by sharing the first mistake, because it is the one most people make without ever realizing it. Mistake #1, believing love would take care of itself. For many years we believed that love, once established, was largely self-sustaining. We assumed that commitment alone was enough to carry us forward. A shared history would compensate for what we no longer said or noticed. After all, we were still together. We were responsible. We showed up for last obligations. What we did not understand was that familiarity can quietly replace attention. When you live alongside someone for decades, it becomes easy to confuse presence with closeness. Conversations become functional. Silence becomes routine. You stop asking questions because you assume you already know the answers. There was no moment when love disappeared. There was only a gradual thinning of connection, so subtle it felt almost natural. We told ourselves this was simply what long marriages looked like. Comfortable, predictable, stable, and in many ways it was. But comfort without curiosity slowly dulls intimacy. We rarely paused to notice how often we were physically together, but emotionally elsewhere. Responsibilities filled the space where listening once lived. Planning replaced sharing. Efficiency replaced tenderness. None of this felt dangerous at the time. It felt practical. The mistake was not neglect but assumption. We assumed that because love had survived so much already, it would continue to survive without deliberate attention. We assumed that history could replace presence. It cannot. History explains how you arrived here, but presence determines whether you remain connected. Only much later did we realize that love does not sustain itself automatically over time. It requires gentle renewal, not through grand gestures, but through noticing. Through choosing to remain curious about someone you think you already know. When love is treated as something that no longer needs tending, it does not break suddenly. It simply stops growing. And what does not grow eventually becomes fragile, even when it appears solid from the outside. Mistake #2, replacing emotional presence with practical duty. Many long marriages do not drift apart because of conflict, betrayal, or sudden rupture. They drift because emotional presence is slowly replaced by practical duty. Life becomes organized around what must be done rather than what must be felt. Partners become reliable collaborators in the logistics of living, while quietly ceasing to be emotional witnesses to each other's inner lives. This shift rarely happens by choice. It emerges gradually, shaped by work schedules, financial pressures, family responsibilities, and the unspoken belief that love will understand why attention has been redirected elsewhere. Providing stability, solving problems, planning ahead, and keeping life functional are all framed as acts of care, and in many ways they are. But when these actions replace emotional availability instead of supporting it, something essential begins to disappear without protest. Over time, conversations change tone, They become efficient rather than exploratory. Words are exchanged to coordinate rather than to connect. Listening becomes transactional, focused on outcomes instead of understanding. Response shift from curiosity to solutions, from presence to performance. Nothing here feels unkind. In fact, it often feels responsible. That is why it goes unnoticed for so long. Emotional presence requires something that practical duty does not. It requires time without a clear objective. It requires attention that is not immediately useful. It asks people to remain open even when there is nothing to fix, nothing to decide, nothing to accomplish. In a life organized around efficiency, this kind of presence can feel unnecessary, even indulgent. As practical duty takes center stage, emotional language quietly erodes. Feelings are summarized rather than explored. Inner experiences are edited for relevance. Moments that once invited closeness are absorbed into routine. And because the structure of the relationship still functions, the absence of emotional presence is mistaken for maturity or stability. Many couples come to believe that emotional closeness is something that naturally fades with time, that depth is replaced by reliability, and that this exchange is simply the cost of longevity. But what is actually fading is not love, but the habit of emotional attunement. Love remains, but it becomes abstract rather than lived. Responsibility is easy to measure. You can see what has been done, what has been provided, what has been managed. Emotional presence leaves no visible record. Its impact is felt rather than documented. And in a world that values what can be counted, what cannot be measured is often undervalued. This is how people begin to feel lonely inside functional relationships. Not because anyone has failed, but because the relationship has been quietly restructured around tasks instead of tenderness. Over time, partners may stop turning toward each other emotionally, not out of disinterest, but out of habit. If this reflection feels familiar, you are not alone. Many long-term relationships pass through this phase without recognizing it for what it is. If you feel comfortable, share in the comments a moment when you realize that duty had quietly replaced presence in your own relationship. Naming it is often the first step towards seeing it clearly. Mistake #3, the avoiding conflict instead of growing through it. We believed that avoiding conflict was a sign of maturity. We told ourselves that silence was preferable to tension, that letting things go was better than reopening difficult conversations. And for a long time this seemed to work. Life remained calm. Disagreements rarely escalated. But unresolved feelings do not disappear. They settle quietly beneath the surface. Over time, they shape tone, distance, and emotional availability. What is left unspoken still influences how people show up for each other. We did not argue much, but we also did not always understand each other deeply. Certain topics became carefully avoided. Certain needs were quietly minimized, not because they were unimportant, but because addressing them felt disruptive. The mistake was believing that peace required silence. In truth, lasting peace requires honesty. Avoiding conflict may preserve surface harmony, but it prevents emotional growth. Intimacy deepens not when there is no disagreement, but when disagreement can be held without fear of rupture. Only later did we realize that conflict, when approached with respect, is not a threat to love. It is evidence of engagement. It signals that both people still care enough to reveal themselves honestly, rather than withdrawing quietly. By the time we recognized this, distance had already grown. Not dramatic distance, but emotional distance, the kind that makes two people feel politely separate rather than deeply connected. And the final mistake was perhaps the most painful to recognize, because it involved time itself. Mistake #4. Assuming there would always be more time. There is a belief that many long marriages quietly depend on, a belief so familiar that it is rarely questioned until something forces it into view. The belief that there will always be more time. More time to reconnect, more time to repair what feels slightly misaligned, more time to say what truly matters once the moment feels right. This belief does not announce itself loudly. It operates gently, almost kindly. It reassures people that nothing needs to be addressed today because tomorrow remains available. It suggests that closeness can be postponed without consequence, that affection can wait until life feels calmer, that meaningful conversations will still be possible once the pressure eases over time. This assumption begins to shape behavior in subtle ways. Conversations are postponed, not out of indifference, but out of practicality. Apologies are delayed because they seem unnecessary in the moment. Affection is deferred because there will be a better time, a quieter evening, a less stressful season, and because nothing appears urgent, the delay feels harmless. What makes this belief particularly powerful is that it aligns perfectly with how daily life unfolds. Predictably accumulates. Energy fluctuates, fatigue becomes familiar, and so the idea of waiting feels reasonable, even wise. People tell themselves that love will understand, that the relationship is strong enough to endure a pause. The shared history provides a buffer against distance. But time does not function the way we imagine it does. Time does not hold space open indefinitely. It does not preserve emotional opportunities in their original form. What is postponed repeatedly does not remain unchanged. It adapts, it softens, it sometimes withdraws quietly, not out of resentment but out of neglect. The danger of assuming there will always be more time is not that it leads to sudden loss, it leads to gradual absence, a kind that is difficult to name because nothing has gone wrong in an obvious way. Life continues, the relationship continues, but something essential becomes thinner, less accessible, less immediate. Many people do not realize how much they rely on this assumption until it is challenged, often by age, by illness, by unexpected change, or by the quiet realization that certain conversations now feel heavier than they once did. The shock is rarely dramatic, it is reflective. People begin to see how often they chose postponement over presence, not because they did not care, but because they believed time was abundant. This assumption also alters how people listen. When time is assumed to be endless, listening becomes casual. Words can be half heard because they can always be revisited. Feelings can be acknowledged lightly because there will be another chance to explore them more deeply. But when time is no longer taken for granted, attention sharpens. What is said matters more because it may not be repeated in the same way. Letting go of the belief that there will always be more time does not create panic. It creates clarity. It shifts attention from future repair to present care. It encourages people to speak while the words still feel natural, to reach while closeness still feels accessible, to notice what matters before it quietly recedes. After 50 years together, what we learned is simple, though not easy. Love is not sustained by time alone. It is sustained by attention, honesty, presence, and the willingness to remain emotionally available, even when life feels demanding. The mistakes that nearly cost us everything were not dramatic. They were ordinary, and that is why they were so dangerous, until we realized how much connection had been quietly postponed. If this reflection stayed with you, consider liking the video and subscribing to Beyond 60 Stories. And I would truly like to hear from you in the comments below. What would you like this channel to explore next? What questions about love, marriage, or long life feel ready to be spoken? Now, thank you for listening and for bringing your own years of experience into this shared moment.